Well, yeah, definitely. We spent about an hour with the trade ambassador, and I will tell you the message he delivered is one, the priority is get Mexico-Canada done. I mean, we have to pass this updated agreement. It's $1.3 trillion worth of economic activity, and if we don't pass it, not only is it going to hurt American industry, but Canada and Mexico will be at a significant impact, potentially recession type of results.
And you have a district upstate New York. I know reasonably well, grew up not far away. There are a lot of farmers, a lot of dairy farmers out there. Is that right? How would they benefit from this agreement?
Well, I think first and foremost, the value added that you would have for value added dairy products being exported to Canada is critical. And it would also stabilize the market and market access to Mexico and Canada. And then it also sets the platform. This negotiated agreement, in my opinion, it has gold standard type of language that then will be deployed in negotiation with China, with Japan, with the EU. So getting this on the books is really critical for the future trade negotiations for America.
What if it doesn't happen? And what about the tariffs that have been part of a lot of these negotiations? Is that having a negative effect for now that might sour people off of these kinds of agreements before they even really see them go into force?
That was absolutely part of the conversation today. Is a lot of members and a lot of industries are seeing the impacts of the tariffs, and how do we take care of the tariffs while we get these agreements on the books and update these agreements so we're in a competitive position. And I think at the end of the day we'll thread this needle, and these tariffs will be something that we can take care of and move forward from.
You know, investors, Congressman, would like to see the finish line when it comes to all of these various negotiations that we have going on with various countries. But at the same time, there are reports that the new administration of Mexico is readying a product list of a whole new product list of goods to put tariffs on. There's also the looming potential European auto tariffs. Can you give us a sense as to whether or not once we cross the finish line on a new NAFTA, once we cross the finish line on a China trade deal, that there aren't more trade skirmishes on the horizon?
Well, I think it's fair to say that on the horizon, we'll always be dealing with enforcement of these new trade agreements. And that is why on the Chinese front, that was part of the conversation today, of making sure we have the structures in place under the negotiated trade results with China so that we can enforce the provisions. That, to me, is a critical update that just isn't in the existing agreements and relationships.
Congressman, while we have you, I was surprised that you didn't support Amazon's HQ2, that was ill-fated HQ2 in Queens. When New Yorkers as a whole were polled about this, and not just people in New York City, but the state did break in support for it, not by a huge margin, but it was there. Why were you not in favor of it?
Well, it wasn't that I want the jobs, I want Amazon to come, but when you're giving away $3 billion to one company, I want to be a voice for those existing businesses of New York, those existing residents of New York that have been there for decades, and say, well, let's stand with them before we move on to outsiders to come into the state, because they've demonstrated a commitment and ability to thrive in New York going forward.
But as you know very well now, I mean, anyone who didn't know before certainly knows the nitty-gritty now, that the $3 billion was in large part incentives. And by the way, about a third of that was incentives that currently exist for anybody who would expand in that district. So they are available for existing New York businesses.
But they were earmarked for Amazon. And my whole point on this is
no, they just would have been the biggest user of them yet.
Well, true. But New York needs to wake up. The residents of New York need to change the tax and spend culture out of Albany, and I think it's changing. I think New York is at the precipice of a Larry Hogan, Charlie Baker Republican rebirth in the governor's office. Stay tuned. I think that's a possibility.
Congressman Reed, I want to change the subject a little bit and unpack your thinking on your vote against the resolution to oppose the president's declaration of an emergency with respect to spending on the wall. It's been pointed out that the emergency powers have been invoked many, many times, but never quite in a circumstance like this one that directly challenged the Congress's power of the purse under the Constitution. I know you come from a district that voted for President Trump. I know you've supported him. I want to get your thoughts about whether the declaration of a national emergency in this case is a threat to the congressional prerogative to control taxing and spending. How do you think that through?
Well, you think it through this way. Congress has delegated this authority to the president, to the executive branch for decades. So it's not true to say that this is the first time this has occurred. We have 31 emergency declarations on the books from Carter's administration. What I was proposing is, look, I recognize the emergency at the border, but we need to curtail the president's power and reform the National Emergencies Act so Congress has to vote on these situations each and every time, rather than what we see where they pick and choose for political purposes when to weigh in. Congress needs to do its job going forward.